This video is ideally a continuation of a video we presented here on the channel a few days ago. It is a mini-series that we decided to title Marines in Tripoli. Not the Tripoli of Libya, mind you, but another Tripoli, the one in Lebanon. Twice the Marines have landed on the beaches. The first time, as we saw in the previous video, was in 1958 to support the fragile local democracy dealing with the crisis caused by the wave of pan-Arabism. Today, however, we tackle another adventure of the Marines in Lebanon, specifically in Tripoli, but especially in Beirut, and it's an adventure that is difficult to forget, especially because of its tragic outcome. Beirut, moreover, is a very beautiful city, a cosmopolitan city, but one that has long been ravaged, a victim of interfaith violence, accustomed for many years to daily clashes between militias along what was left of its streets and squares. In such a scenario, two almost simultaneous explosions should not make news. Indeed, in those years, from 1975 to 1990, it was common to hear numerous explosions multiple times a day, coming from various places, from the Shuf, the mountain range where the Druze fired mortars, to the Corniche, the seaside promenade, and against the government buildings where ministers were holed up, all inside the bunkers where they responded to the Maronite artillery, which also targeted the western sectors of Beirut, where Amal and the Sunnis habitually looked at each other with suspicion, sometimes even from the sea, where a foreign fleet, mainly American, had been stationed for some time. From there, occasionally, a cannon shot or a missile aimed at the mountains would arrive. For Beirut, since the early 80s, getting used to the sound of explosions had been quite simple. After all, after 8 years of bloody civil war, any explosion would seem like any other. On Sunday, October 23, 1983, something was different about those two powerful blasts that came within a short distance of time and space from each other. One very strong explosion came from the international airport, long closed and used as a base for U.S. landing forces. Another, less intense, more muffled, came from the suburb of Ramlet al-Baida. It was the base of the French paratroopers, and it came 10 minutes after the first one. The columns of smoke rising left no room for illusions. Every Lebanese understood what had happened. A simultaneous attack on the two largest contingents of the International Peace Force, known as MNF. An attack carried out using a new technique, truck bombs driven by suicide attackers. The MNF had arrived in Beirut at the end of August 1982 after the IDF's Operation Peace for Galilee had cornered the PLO, threatening the very existence of the Palestinian fighting entity, with its men surrounded and almost out of food, water, and ammunition. Yasser Arafat opted for emergency negotiations, requesting an international corridor for the emergency evacuation of his fighters. To ensure a quiet escape, the American Marines, French paratroopers, and Italian bersaglieri came to the rescue, positioning themselves at the port and overseeing the boarding of the guerrillas, who were, of course, unarmed. The subsequent assassination of Bashir Gemayel, the elected but not yet inaugurated president, by a bomb attack exactly 24 hours after the departure of the foreign contingent, opened another season of chaos. This period was marked by the assault of the Maronite phalangists on the Palestinian refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, which were left defenseless after Arafat's departure. This is a very dark chapter, still remembered today in the Middle East with deep indignation and disgust, especially in Israel. It was a full-scale massacre carried out under the light of flares fired by Israeli self-propelled guns positioned around the shanty towns. That massacre of women, elderly people, children, and unarmed civilians outraged the world and forced the MNF to return in full force to try to restore at least a semblance of order to the city. The mission, which started poorly, continued even worse. Within a few weeks, the contingent realized that the Lebanese state was on the brink of collapse, too internally divided to think it could overcome the new challenges of the further phase of the conflict. To complicate the local situation, two organizations had occupied the space left by the Palestinians, ensuring a further powerful escalation of violence. The first to suffer was the United States Embassy, hit on April 18, 1983, by a bomb attack organized by a new group, Islamic Jihad. Using the technique of a suicide truck bomb, the vehicle in question was purchased in Texas. Funny, right? Grotesque, tragic. Once bought, it was shipped by sea, then filled with explosives and finally driven by a suicide driver under the portico of the 6-story horseshoe-shaped building that housed the American diplomatic delegation and the Central Intelligence Agency offices. The explosion tore off the central facade of the building, causing the death of military personnel. American and Lebanese civilian personnel and even a journalist were also killed. The attack was claimed by the terrorist group, the armed wing of a new political party. This party had recently appeared on the Lebanese scene, but had already promised to become a major player in the tragic events of the Land of the Cedars. The name Hezbollah emerged for the first time in June 1982 as a Shiite faction, directly supported and financed by the Pasdaran, the guardians of the revolution in Iran. The large Lebanese Shiite community, the third largest sect in the country after the Maronites and Sunnis, had until then almost entirely identified with the Amal movement founded by Nabi Berri. Amal had first formed a difficult alliance with the Maronites and Israelis against Syria, and then became totally independent. Since the summer of 1982, Amal had seen its ranks of supporters and fighters dwindle, while Hezbollah grew exponentially, also thanks to Iranian support. The first actions of the new group, carried out under the name of the Islamic Jihad Organization, were directed against foreign civilians in Lebanon, not military personnel, but civilians, members of the press, diplomats, and businessmen. These individuals were kidnapped, and their release was conditional on increasingly heavy demands, including the total withdrawal of foreign military contingents. The April 18, 1983 attack marked a turning point, both for the new technique being tested and for the sudden escalation in the level of conflict. While the Reagan administration decided to increase military spending to support the mission, several Republican politicians in Lebanon began calling for a rapid troop withdrawal, fearing a second Vietnam. However, nothing foreshadowed a second bomb attack. Despite the maximum level of alert at Lebanese bases and embassies, the simultaneous double assault came unexpectedly. On Sunday, October 23, 1983, the atmosphere in Beirut was initially calm. At dawn, the mullahs called the faithful to prayer, while the bells of the Maronite and Greek Orthodox churches were still silent, awaiting the morning mass. At 6:31 a.m., a yellow Mercedes-Benz tanker truck arrived at the airport. Initially, no one paid attention to it. Sunday was the water supply day for the Marine base, which had been quartered in one of the airport buildings for a year. The Lebanese checkpoint didn't even check the driver's documents, who turned out to be an Iranian named Ismail Asghari, allowing him to continue on his way unimpeded. Imagine this heavy vehicle proceeding steadily towards the parking lot of the terminal without accelerating. It circles around a couple of times, but no one is suspicious yet. Suddenly, the truck stops. The driver shifts into first gear and races towards the Marine base. The sentries don't know how to react due to overly strict rules of engagement. The driver isn't shooting, so they can't return fire. But there's that vehicle coming at full speed. In a few seconds, the truck crashes into the building. The driver activates the detonator. From the tank, where 9,500 kilograms of TNT and several propane tanks are stored, a fireball spreads, engulfing the structure, collapsing all 4 floors, and causing the death of 241 military personnel. While Asghari is executing his suicide maneuver, a second truck heads towards another building, the Drakkar, 6 kilometers from the airport, in the Ramlet al-Baida neighborhood in the southwest, a Muslim area. There, French paratroopers from the 1st Parachute Regiment are stationed. The element of surprise leaves the defenders without time to react. The French quickly realize that the unexpected truck hasn't come bearing benevolent gifts and fire their light weapons at the threat. The driver dies instantly and doesn't even manage to enter the target building. But the guards don't have time to open the truck cab's door before an explosion engulfs both them and the adjacent structure. Someone observed the scene from a distance and pressed the button for the second explosion, equally destructive, leaving the mutilated bodies of 58 and demolishing the French unit's barracks. Rescue operations began immediately. The future Prime Minister, Rafik Hariri, then a construction entrepreneur, provided his cranes to lift the concrete slabs from the rubble, while field hospitals, especially the Italian one, were crowded with a multitude of injured people. For political reasons, both the French and the Americans refused the help offered by the Israelis, who were kept at a distance. This was to avoid providing any pretext for further attacks. The claim for these explosions came within a few hours, with Tehran's spokesperson initially rejecting the accusations indignantly. There was no doubt the hand of extremist Shiites was behind that double truck bomb. The Franco-American response involved air bombardments targeting Hezbollah training camps along the Bekaa Valley, although these did not cause significant damage. The two explosions marked the end of the multinational mission, which in the following month saw the Lebanese army losing entire brigades and starting to mutiny, some joining the Druze, others the Sunnis. The international mission began planning its return home. Small contingents and some diplomats would remain to try to mend a national wound that had long been infected. Meanwhile, the Italian mission would mourn some fallen soldiers and live with the constant nightmare of a third truck bomb. Lebanon's wound would only be healed with a drastic solution, the Taif Agreements, which forever reshaped the political geography of Lebanon. Those young men who sang the United States Marine Corps anthem never returned. Since then, for them, it was almost a second Vietnam, shorter, different, marked by attacks carried out by people they couldn't understand. Unlike Vietnam, the Marines had truly gone to bring peace, and being attacked during a peace mission was shockingly beyond any limit. But that is the risk of peacekeeping, maintaining peace at all costs, even in dangerous places where today's friend can become tomorrow's enemy or spy, where a truck meant to deliver water actually brings explosives, and where distinguishing between allies and adversaries isn't always simple.